Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie Hopper. Welcome back to Lead Strong. We've had a little break over the holiday season. I am one of the directors of the talent practice and I'm joined by Celine Floyd, my co-host. A few words for those of you who are not familiar with Capfinity. We are a global business based in Birmingham, London, Dublin, various US locations and Sydney, Australia, for those lucky few employees. And we have been helping organisations find candidates, develop employees and transform their business around our USP of strengths-based assessment and development for over 16 years. Celine and I head up the talent practice together, where we support organisations to identify and develop their talent all the way through from early careers to their executive leadership. And we do that through a market-leading method of a strengths lens. Celine, over to you.
Thanks, Steph. Hi everyone. Brilliant to be back for our 18th episode after a short hiatus. We have an incredibly exciting episode today, and we are very privileged to be joined by our guest, who I will introduce shortly. But yeah, lovely to see everyone. Celine Floyd, as Steph said, co-director of the talent practice with a specialist area in leadership assessment. So today's topic is around this idea of compassionate leadership, which we're really looking forward to kind of digging into, and we are very, very fortunate to be joined by Professor Michael West from the King's Fund. Hello Michael, thank you for joining us.
Hi Celine and Stephanie, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. I wonder if, to get us started, perhaps you could introduce yourself to the audience, Michael, a little bit about you and your career, and perhaps why the topic of leadership specifically is of such an interest to you, why that's an area of passion for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Celine. So my name is Michael West. I'm Senior Visiting Fellow at the King's Fund in London, which is a charity focused on developing health services in the United Kingdom. I'm also Professor of Organisational Psychology at Lancaster University, and I'm a psychologist by training, and my career has primarily been focused on how we create the conditions within organisations, work communities, where we ensure high performance and that the people who work in those organizations thrive, are fulfilled and are well. And the topic of leadership, I think, is fundamentally important because culture, I think, is the most important characteristic of any organization. And we know from the last 100 years of leadership research and research on organizational culture, that leadership is the most powerful lever we have for shaping, nurturing the kind of cultures we want in organizations.
Absolutely, really powerful, isn't it? And I guess over the last couple of years, Michael, we've seen a real kind of shift in terms of how people are working around the world. There's lots said about it. And in some case, I think some people have experienced maybe reduced trust or kind of new power dynamics, perhaps prompted by the stress that they're under, or the lack of visibility perhaps that they have back to their organisations. And something I found really interesting is that a number of my friends work in leadership roles in the NHS, and a little bit of me feels a bit like, you know, I understand in the private sector what that's looked like, but actually, well, if I'm a lead consultant in a big central London hospital, why would this virtual world impact me? And actually, lots of them have reflected how they never had to join a virtual meeting before. There might have been the odd teleconference, but now when they're not in the hospital, their non-working day, they're expected on video and to be present on all those calls. So I think it has affected so many different people in different ways. And we know that workplace accidents often are due to stress and pressure that people are under, and that 80% of doctor visits apparently are due to stress, which is an incredible statistic. So I think it's really key that we think about how leaders create a positive work environment. And I know from all the work you've done for yourself, that starting point, I believe, is leading with compassion and demonstrating compassion through a workplace so that, you know, we can create conditions where everybody can thrive and flourish every day. So to sort of kick us off, I wanted to ask you, what would you say are the most important components of compassionate leadership?
Well, compassion is one of our three core emotional regulation systems. So we have one emotional regulation system focused on threat and how we deal with threat, one focused on goal acquisition, and then the third focused on nurturing, connection, compassion, if you like. And you can argue what you've just described is that there's been an imbalance between these emotional regulation systems in society and work organizations, people so focused on targets, productivity, achieving things, or workplaces characterized by bullying, harassment, discrimination, that many people are disengaged in their workplaces or find them very stressful, as you say, with consequent impacts on their performance, but also on their health. And that we really should be ensuring balance between these emotional regulation systems, helping people feel connected, feel like they belong, feeling they're valued, respected, supported, feeling they have voice and influence, feeling that they can do their jobs effectively. So translated into practice, compassionate leadership is leadership that embodies compassion. And that means, in simple terms, 4 behaviors: leaders who attend to those they lead. And that means, I guess, 2 things: leaders who give it their attention, who are present with those they lead as well. So it's about being present and about giving attention. Nancy Klein uses a wonderful phrase, listening with fascination, that I think evokes that really well. And secondly, then, it's leaders who seek to understand the challenges that those they lead face, not by simply imposing some hierarchical understanding from some elevated leadership position, but through a dialogue with those they lead, so that they arrive at a shared understanding of the challenges that those they lead face. And the third is leaders who have the emotional intelligence to be empathic towards those they lead, feeling with them about the pressures they're under, chronic work overload, anxieties about their job, and who have the courage to, as it were, mirror the feelings of those they lead without being overwhelmed by them. And that then gives them the motivation for the fourth element of compassion, which is helping or serving those they lead. And in practice, what that means is helping those they lead to do their jobs more effectively by helping to remove obstacles that get in the way, or helping to ensure they have the resources they need to do their jobs effectively. And this is not, some new fancy model of leadership. We've known for 60 or 70 years that these 4 leadership behaviors are the most important behaviors that characterize effective leadership. Probably the most important skill of any leader is listening actively to those they lead. And we know from all of the research on leadership that probably the most important task of a leader is helping those they lead to do their jobs more effectively. And the research evidence reinforces the idea that leaders who deploy these 4 behaviors consistently are more effective in terms of outcomes for their teams, for their organizations.
Got someone agreeing with us who's watching live, saying 100% emotional communication with their teams is critical. Absolutely. I love those 4 areas, and something about the 4th one really speaks to me about being in service of others. That it's so easy, isn't it, in this world to be kind of self-obsessed at some level, but actually remembering our job is to be of service to others is lovely.
Well, and what's really interesting about that is that that the neuroscience studies comparing empathy alone versus compassion give us a fascinating picture. So when we ask people to be empathic towards somebody in distress, neuroscience studies show that that's associated with the activation of various pain centers in the brain. And that's not surprising, because we're mirroring, as it were, feeling the other's pain. Whereas when we ask people to be compassionate with that additional critical component of helping, that's associated with the activation of reward centers in the brain. Why? Because we're all, virtually all of us are hardwired to be compassionate, to help others in distress, to be altruistic, because evolution has hardwired us to be that way, because that's how we're able to form trusting relationships, connection, the sense of belonging, communities, families that support each other. So it's a deeply embedded reaction in our evolutionary history, and I think is hugely important in the context of any community, including work communities.
Michael, I was going to ask you actually, because when you were speaking, that was the piece that really resonated with me. When you said mirroring without feeling overwhelmed, and I think that's tricky, and that's been tricky over the course of the pandemic, especially for leaders. I think, wanting to empathize, but equally having, a lot of other stuff going on, and striking that balance. And so is that one of the tactics one can deploy then to try to stop feeling overwhelmed and to move towards that positive place, as you say, is to try to be of service and try to help? Fascinating, isn't it, that actually activates a more positive part? Sounds like that's a tactic. And I guess my question is there anything else that leaders can do to stop slipping into that feeling of overwhelmedness?
Yeah, the reality of these last couple of years is that it has been a difficult time for everybody. In April 2020, most of us around the world were afraid for our lives because we didn't understand what this virus was like. We had no defenses against it, no vaccinations and so on. So it has been hugely difficult. And most of my work has been in the health service, where people have suffered enormously. And many, of course, have lost their lives in the course of the pandemic. So, leadership is I think, about not necessarily having the answers to all of the difficult questions we face, but making sure we're bringing attention to bear on the most difficult issues. And it's having the courage to be present with others. And I think when we're truly present with others, then that enables us to be present with their feelings. So the starting place is, in a sense, being present, listening. We talk about leadership presence, that person's got presence. I think what it means is this person is present with us when they're with us. They're not off planning the next meeting and thinking about what's just happened. They're truly present with us in the here and now. So the three of us, in having this conversation, can choose to be present with each other and to connect with each other. And compassion's about blurring the boundaries between self and other. But it also means being present with ourselves, so that I become aware of, in that presence of not only what you're feeling, but what my reaction is too. And that presence, I think, enables us to make really good or much more effective judgments about when I'm allowing these feelings to become my drama, rather than me seeking to understand what you're feeling, putting myself in your shoes without making it my drama. I mean, of course, we get upset when we listen to people in pain. And, sometimes when we're talking with people who've experienced great tragedy, we tear up. There's nothing wrong with that. That's, it's a normal human empathic reaction. But it's having the presence and the awareness to know when we're making it our own drama, rather than being present with and for the other.
Okay. It's funny, that being present reminded me of something, Michael. I coached a leader quite a while ago in financial services, and he had a real struggle with being present for his team and stakeholders and so on. So he came up with a really simple tactic, which was, as he walked into a meeting room, because of course all his meetings in those days were in person, he would psychologically put his notebook and laptop down on the floor by the entrance to the room. It was in his head he was doing that. And he would tell himself that all those things were still going to be there at the end of the 30 minutes. But actually, when he could pick them up on the way out, but he wasn't going to be distracted by them in that moment.
I think it's a really helpful tactic. It's also, I think, about recognizing that being present, it's not something we have to learn. And another skill we've got to go out and learn and build muscles for being present. Being present is more about letting go and relaxing into who we truly are in this moment. As I say, the three of us being together and relaxing in this presence in the moment. And if we get stuck in some spiral of saying, oh, I wasn't present, oh, I failed again, that just adds another layer that gets in the way of being present. It's about, I think, having the self-awareness to relax in the moment, to be with the other. And that's something that we can enjoyably practice in every interaction, not just at work. It can be an interaction with somebody at the supermarket checkout counter. It can be with our partners, our children, our friends, to truly be present in the conversation. And what's really, I think, important to know as well is that, as I mentioned earlier, that presence, that intent to help is rewarding for us. We know that when people practice these skills, that it has a significant benefit for their mental health. So, for example, we know that when GPs and nurses are asked to be extra compassionate in their interactions over a 2-week period, that has a significant impact on their own well-being, lower levels of anxiety, stress, and depression. So it's a kind of self-reinforcing process in the way. Of course, we can practice mindfulness skills and all that sort of thing to help, but it is, in the end, I think, important to recognize it's our natural way of being, not some added skill we've got to learn.
I love that. I think for me, there's something around, there's like a kindness to oneself that you're doing, isn't there, when you're allowing yourself to just put down the 400 things that you're carrying in your mind at any one time, and actually just letting yourself, as you say, relax into it. I think there's a kindness to oneself, which I'm really loving in what you're describing.
I think that's and it's a really important observation, Celine. It's, this is about being effortlessly present.
Yeah.
If you're making effort, you're not present.
Yeah.
Actually, what you're doing is you're saying, I must be present. I must be present.
Yeah.
It's about effortlessly being here and now together.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Thank you, Michael. Lots of really interesting food for thought there around, as an individual, as a leader, we can be more compassionate. I think often the opportunity and challenge for a leader is, as you said right at the beginning, it's around the kind of culture that you create. And so I wonder if I may lean our conversation into this kind of culture creation. And in your new book, you talk about compassionate leadership across boundaries and the creation of a culture when you have people with different personalities, different leadership styles, from different cultural backgrounds, and how if you can create this culture of compassionate leadership, actually we know that enhances the intrinsic motivation of staff, as you say, and then you get a culture of learning where innovation tends to be more successful. You can take risks a bit more effectively in that kind of safe environment. So we know that having that kind of culture is really valuable on multiple levels. I guess the question is the million-dollar question. How can leaders create and nurture this culture of compassion more broadly? Michael, any top tips?
What we all have in our gift immediately as leaders is how we behave in interactions. So we all have the opportunity in every interaction to listen, or let me put it in another way, to attend, understand, empathize, and help. We all can do that. We can do that in every interaction. We can do that, as you were saying, Steph, in meetings where we put the laptop and the phone to one side, and we can choose to attend, understand, empathize, and help. And the nature of being human in social situations is those emotional ripples spread out. We know that when people are kind to others, that those who are affected by that then go on and are more likely to be kind to others, not simply to reciprocate. So that's something we all have in our power. The second is, I think, in terms of creating cultures, is that it's really important that we are, as organizations, focused on how do we develop this way of leading in leaders across the organization. In fact, for everybody in the organization, because everybody is a leader.
Yeah.
in a workplace, in the work I do in health services, everybody's responsible for safety of care and safety and quality of care for patients. So everyone's a leader. So how do we develop these leadership skills in all of the people in our workplace? And that means having a leadership strategy focused on developing those leadership skills for everybody. In the health service in Wales, Health Education and Improvement Wales, the national body, has committed to a 10-year strategy for developing compassionate leadership across the whole of health and social care.
Amazing.
Berkshire Health, it's an organization that is focused on delivering mental health services, has been retraining all its staff over the course of the last 3 or 4 years. They've retrained about 2,000 of their staff in compassionate leadership, led by Dr. Deborah Lee, clinical psychologist. There are initiatives to train foundation doctors now in compassionate leadership, so we're developing leadership, as it were, across the system. But it's also important, if compassion is a value, that we build that in to all of the processes within organizations. So that means, values-based recruitment, values-based appraisal, values-based induction. So when we're recruiting people, if we say, compassion is a core value of this organization, then that means, what we're saying is that's one of the 3 or 4 most important things to us. So when we recruit people, our focus should be on recruiting for those values first and foremost. It's all very well having somebody with great technical skills as a surgeon, but if they're if it's somebody who bullies or harasses people, then that corrodes the culture. So values-based recruitment, selecting, recruiting for compassion, appraising people, appraising teams on compassion, and so on. So building in these values into the DNA of the organization. So there's both a kind of what we can do as individuals, how we develop leadership, and how we build this in to the genetic structure of the organization.
Yeah, it's about it, being reflected off of all different, mirrors around you, isn't it? So everywhere you turn, it's
it permeates.
Yeah,
it permeates the culture, the way we do things around here. Indeed.
Yeah. Okay.
Something that's on my mind, Michael. Sorry, Celine. Is I don't know whether you remember, you recorded a podcast with the lovely Dr. Reena Jamnadas a few years ago. And in that podcast, you both talked about listening with fascination and Nancy Klein. But there was a quote in there where you said, if we listen with fascination, we will hear things we don't want to hear. And I just wondered your reflections on that, because the thing that's always on my mind around this is how we handle conflict. And is there a sort of wise compassion that we need to demonstrate? We still need to be able to have conversations maybe with candor at times, because we can't avoid those. And I just wondered your thoughts on that.
So Dr. Reena Jamnadas, I remember that conversation because of her wisdom and inspiration, of course. So it was a lovely conversation. And the point about compassionate leadership is it's about being effective for those we serve. It's not about being nice, or it's not some soft cushion scented candles approach to leadership. This is about being effective. It's about our compassion is for those we serve in our organizations, for those we lead within the organization. And listening with fascination, of course, is about seeking to understand, arrive at a shared understanding. And inevitably, because we all have different points of view in diverse organizations, that will lead to conflicting perspectives. But compassion is about creating, as it were, a kind of psychological safety where people feel a sense of mutual respect, where there is respect for the other's point of view, even when it differs from mine, and a genuine curiosity to seek to understand and to empathize. And when we orient ourselves towards those conversations where there are differing perspectives, and we see that difference in perspective as being something to approach, to lean into, and to explore and to benefit from, then we begin to manage conflict in really effective ways rather than being threatened by it or defensive or closing down, because differing points of view are, in a sense, metaphorically, if you like, the grit in the oyster. When we explore those differences in a climate of mutual respect and constructive controversy, new creative thinking emerges, and we can explore alternative ways of understanding. And for sure, what we're faced with in our world is the need for creativity and for respecting and exploring different perspectives in the course of trying to create more compassionate communities and more compassionate work organizations. In fact, I think compassionate leadership is, if you like, a perfect crucible for getting the benefits from conflicting perspectives in organizations.
Brilliant. Well, I can't believe our time is almost up.
Flown by.
Flown by. I mean, in summary, there's so much in this conversation. I think, firstly, it was those core components of compassionate leadership. And I loved your quick way of summarizing those, Michael. I think you said attend, understand, listen, help.
Attend, understand, empathize, and help.
Empathize and help. Brilliant. Yeah. And some of our talk around how compassion is one of the core emotional regulation systems that we have in the brain, and people have perhaps been experiencing an imbalance around those regulation systems in more recent times. And also our conversation struck me around the mirroring without feeling overwhelmed. I think there must be so many people who have had that as a challenge over the last couple of years, how we empathize and how we do that without taking on what we're listening to. And I loved what you said about, I think it was GPs, but basically the benefit to our own mental health of being compassionate to others. So there's a win-win there, and that helps our own well-being and so on. And the idea of just being effortlessly present is wonderful. And finally, I think the emotional ripples that can go through the organisation when we started talking about the culture and so on. So just to bring things to a close, let me ask Celine, have you got a final reflection, Celine, and then we'll go to Michael.
Well, what a privilege it's been to have this conversation with you, Michael. Thank you so much. I think the key takeaway for me is that when we think about compassionate leadership, it's not about learning something new. Actually, this is about leaning into who we are as human beings on this planet and what we are hardwired to be like and to behave. And so this is, about being true to ourselves, kind to ourselves, and honouring who we are as a species. And on that basis, it should feel very easy and very natural. So I leave feeling excited and not daunted by it as a topic. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Celine. And Michael, a final word from you.
Well, I'd like to echo what Celine was saying, that, the reality of our existence as a species is interconnection. We're interconnected with each other. We're interconnected with the ecosystem we're a part of. We're interconnected with the planet. And compassion is a way of connecting with others. And given the challenges we face of pandemic, climate change, loss of biodiversity, inter-tribal wars across national boundaries, I think it's really important at this time that we nurture connection and compassion, blurring the boundaries between self and other, because in order to respond to the challenges we face, then we have to work together. We have to see that interconnection between each other and with the planet of which we're a part, if we're to solve the problems that we face now and in the future. So compassion is core to all of that, and having the courage to practice compassionate leadership is a contribution we all can make.
Yes, Amazing. And actually, you did strike me, Michael, when you said we're all leaders. I think that's, really powerful for us to remember. It's easy to just focus on the top people in an organization, but actually we all lead in different ways through our roles, and we've all got a duty to be present for each other through our roles. Thank you very much, Michael. A wonderful episode. There's lots of comments that I've not been able to get to in the chat. People reacting and responding. I can see the wonderful Rebecca Carl in there, who I know is an old friend of ours. So thank you, Rebecca, for all your thoughts and comments. We will be back in 2 weeks' time. A slightly different topic. We'll be looking at the sort of flexible mindset that leaders are having to take to how to create organizations where people do have this kind of remote only or flexibility in their roles. And we've got two great guests, Jessica Chivers and Simon Gibson, for that episode. But for now, many thanks to all of you for watching, and see you in 2 weeks' time. And Michael, a special thank you to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.